I'm really excited to be here. Honestly, I'm really excited to answer everyone's questions. I wish we could be there in person. I'm definitely a hand talker, so in person, definitely, I think I come alive a little more. But even in the state, I'm definitely excited to hang out with you guys after and answer any questions you have. A little bit about myself. So I just started recently working as a product manager at Facebook. But previous to that, I spent the last 8 years as a producer at Riot Games, working most recently on Valorant, basically the last 2 years, and then my previous 6 years working on League of Legends. I worked on a variety of things, sort of being at Riot for that long. So like on Valorant, I sort of worked on our marketing team and sort of getting that ready for launch. And previous to that on League of Legends, I worked on a lot of social experiences. So things like our group chat and our missions. I also our alternative game mode. So if you think of the main League of Legends, I worked on sort of the alternative side, which is things like owning ARAM and some of the more experimental game modes. And out of that came TFT or Teamfight Tactics as well. So again, super excited to be here. I'm sort of excited for this format as well. I hope you guys happy to hang out and answer questions. Also happy to connect afterwards on LinkedIn as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Margaret, for that wonderful introduction. Who's excited to learn from her? Because I know I am. We love seeing your comments throughout the night, so let us know if you're enjoying the topic or if you find something that resonates with you, please dump it in. Love to see it. So let's press start on this adventure. So this is where you get to decide the direction of tonight, which is pretty exciting. So we're going to launch a poll with all these topics that you see on screen right now, and you get to choose what topic you'd like Margaret to start us off with. So here we are, we've launched the poll. All right, we're going to end the poll in a couple of seconds here. All right, so I'm going to share the results and we'll see what won. Very close tie. This is very close results here. But the audience has spoken, and we're going to start off with game design and product management. So let's dive deeper. So, hey, Margaret, from my understanding, game design is different than UX, UI design. These are departments that product work really closely with. So how does game design fit within this model, and what is the process of working with them?
Yeah, so game design is sort of a unique design discipline that obviously doesn't fit in a lot of other areas. Like a lot of times we'll have game designers and we'll have UX and UI designers and we'll have other designers. I think in some organizations you might have something called like a product designer that you partner with that sometimes sort of takes on some of these like broader roles. But often times you don't even have that, like, especially if you're a small company, you don't have that sort of design partner. And you as the PM are actually spending a lot of your time thinking of solutions, not just the problems in the audience. So with the game designer though, they're the ones actually thinking of a lot of the solutions to the sort of questions or problems that the PM's thinking about. So we sort of split it up in terms of like, I'll think about the who we're targeting, like what is our target audience, what are their motivations, and why are they the right audience, or why is it the right sort of solution to that problem? And then the designers are just thinking of, okay, if that's the problem we're trying to define, that's the audience we're targeting, what is the actual right way to solve those problems? So it ends up with this sort of very collaborative back and forth where you both really, really need to be on the same page, because you're sort of intertwined that way, where normally it might all be in your head, or it might be, sort of broken out into the different design disciplines that you might have, like UX, UI, engineering, etc. So I think that's really an interesting dynamic, and it means that my game designer is the person I probably spend the most amount of time with. They're the person I, for lack of a better term, give bad ideas to. Like I definitely have sat in, had coffee with or sat in a small meeting room with my game designer and been like, what if we did this? And they're like, that's a horrible idea, Margaret. But I understand where you're going. I understand the problem you're trying to solve. And so you really need that like back and forth rapport with them, because design is like, especially game design is one of those things where you're talking about a lot of like, this doesn't feel right and here's why. And they need to take that and sort of turn that into actual system mechanics or changing combat and things like that. I think one of the other things as well is game designers are also thinking like across the whole product. So often you have UX designers who are like, okay, I'm going to think about the UX for this page. But game designers need to take into consideration not just like one piece of the puzzle, but the whole puzzle together. Because if they make a change to combat, it's going to affect, you know, the weapons we have, or it's going to affect character design, which is other teams, right? And or it's even going to affect things you wouldn't think about, like engineering and systems. So that say they decide, hey, I want to make a character that teleports. The engineer might look at them like, are you crazy? We can't do teleporting characters. And so you definitely have this aspect where when they're thinking of their designs, they need to think about some of the current constraints they're under with the tech or the ripple effects of what they do. And so, you know, again, they need to also be thinking and working with a lot of other disciplines. So they think about art, they think about engineering, they think about a lot of those things that you wouldn't necessarily think about with game design. So that's why I actually feel like a lot of game designers have a lot of producer or like product manager like mentality, where they're always thinking about how does this trickle out? How does this impact everyone? Which is kind of cool because they kind of get how you think, but also at the same time, it's like it can be kind of challenging because also sometimes you might step on each other's toes. So building that like working relationship that's really strong, where you can bring dumb ideas up and you can, you know, for lack of a better term, you know, be their sounding board and you can be, and they can be yours, really leads to like great design. Because I think that one of the things that I've seen happen, like that really exemplifies this, is working with some of the designers on League of Legends on missions. You know, I sort of had an MVP and like, we're going to do these missions for this event and it's going to be short term and that's great. But actually working really close with my designer meant that when he was thinking of the design for these things, he was actually thinking about, okay, well, this isn't going to be just 10 missions forever. She's going to want to have a lot more. She's going to want to have events going on and other missions going on and all these things going on. And how do we make sure that players aren't overwhelmed by missions? So he's taking that into consideration into his design from the beginning. So that can be like, that back and forth needs to be there because he's making decisions against your product. And so that worked out really well, where like, you know, he took a lot of that into consideration. And also like when he worked with engineering, he was like, hey, it's not going to be 10 forever, guys. And they also could take that and sort of trickles out and, you know, ripples through the team, which is amazing.
That's awesome. I love the part where you talked about, you know, product management, thinking about problem space, and then the game design is like the solution. So you're working, go hand in hand. You know, I definitely have ideas in my head where I'm like, okay, I wonder how this would work, but I don't have that game design to like, you know, talk to and to just throw my bad ideas with.
Yeah. I feel like I'm not actually a game designer, but I've worked with a lot of really good ones. So now I'm pretty good at sussing out good game design versus not. I can't tell you how to do it, but I can tell you when it's like, that doesn't feel right. And exactly, like that really close-knit relationship.
Yeah, that's awesome. And honestly, I didn't know, you know, I myself am a product manager at a tech company, so I have no idea what game design looks like, but it's really cool how they also work. They're not just looking at, you know, the product, but they're similar to PMs where they're seeing the whole system, they're working with everyone, and that really similar to how product management works is when you consult everybody, you end up with a great design at the end. So that's really great to hear. So thank you, Margaret, for those wonderful insights in game design. And I know we mentioned this in the chat, but for those who have questions, please drop them in the Q&A box, and we'll definitely get to it at the end. And so now we've reached another crossroad, and we would love to know what other topic you'd like us to go down. So we're just going to launch that poll right now. I'm going to give it a couple more seconds. Awesome. So it sounds like you all want us to go into going from 0 to 1, taking something from an idea to launch. And that is an amazing choice, especially for both product management and those who want to make their own games. And so let's see where this leads us. Margaret, product managers are typically well-versed in what I like to call the pre-introduction phase of like the product lifecycle, where we're defining the problems that customers have and we're trying to figure out our target audience, determining the buyer's journey, validating it all, etc. And so how does that differ from video games, and what kind of factors do you account for?
Yeah. So I think there's sort of two major things I think about that, like, I think are probably the biggest differences. I think one in particular is defining success. So something that every PM has to do is like, well, what does success look like? What is that criteria? And I think it's definitely can be more difficult with games because you're dealing with things that are a little more subjective, like what is fun, right? Is this fun enough? Type of thing. So I think, like, for example, for like a typical product, you're like, I don't know, pick an example like delivering groceries, right? Like, if that's the purpose of your app or of your product, you know that delivering groceries is the goal. So it's pretty easy. Were groceries delivered? Yes or no, right? You can measure that really quickly. Of course, there's like nuance to that, like, was it the right groceries and was it in enough time? But in general, like, were groceries delivered? Yes, no. But again, when you get to games, you're like, is this combat fun? Is it fun enough? And you want to, like, you might have a different opinion of what fun is than me. And we could sit here for indefinitely talking about, was this fun? Should I change this? And we could literally also make changes and end up in a place where it's like, well, is it more fun or less fun? And just go in circles. And so I think it's one of those things when you're doing that, like, you're looking at things like themes, like environments, like characters, like combat, skill cap, rewards, and you're trying to pull that all together into something that somehow measures success. And of course, you have some like launch metrics, right? Like number of people who play it, how long retention, right? Like how long, what's it look like at 2 weeks? But getting to that point of saying, should we launch this? You can't do a little test yourself and just be like, yep, it works, therefore yes. So I think that's one of the huge challenges that we face. And I think it's I've been doing this for like a decade and it's still a challenge we can come up against. So I think one of the things with that in particular, way I try to like solve it, and I don't think it's solved, but I think one of the ways I try to like solve that is to really think about what is the moment to moment fun, because you can layer on a lot of extrinsic rewards and extrinsic things that make people come back and get those like day 14 retention metrics. But if you're not layering that on a core moment to moment fun, you're really going to struggle. And that's the moment where you're either surprised by something, you feel accomplished at something, that sense of personal accomplishment or personal autonomy, your choice of being well rewarded. And those are the type of things that I look for when I'm like looking for that really big kernel. Is like, was it satisfying? Did I feel a sense of accomplishment? Did I feel a sense of skill or mastery, if that's what you're going for in your game? To try to really hone in really tightly on that. So I think that's definitely like one big piece that I think is a huge challenge and probably quite different. I think the other thing, sort of touch on a little, but the other thing is actually like, is releasing the product and like what's MVP, right? We all talk about like, okay, we want to get the smallest product, get out there, test, iterate. Like that sounds amazing. But one of the issues with that is like, often with like tech products, you can ship it delivers groceries, right? And every new feature you add is an improvement to it. The fundamental need has been met by the default of your ship. And so your MVP is easier to define because like, does it meet the basic need we're trying to do? But again, with games, you have this balancing act because you want to ship it, you want to hear what players see, you want to talk to players, you want to learn from their interactions, but you also have a huge first impression factor, right? Like we've all played games maybe that came out too early or we didn't feel polished enough. Most recently, probably Cyberpunk for a lot of us. It's like such a topical example, but it makes a huge first impression. And the first impression is like, doesn't come down to, did this deliver my groceries? Yes, no, it's, I didn't like this. And so when you're working with something that's not a utility, that's not trying to solve a problem, but to create like an immersive experience, to create something that actually like brings you joy, the impression you're making isn't, it did this well or not. It's, I liked this, or I felt connected to this world. And that's a much harder, much more subjective impression to get over. Like on League, I have many friends who tried League in like 2012 or whatever, and they're like, I don't really like League. And I hear that all the time. People are like, I don't really like League. And I'm like, that's cool. We don't all have to like League. I mean, everyone feels like they're going to offend me. I'm like, that's cool. It's not for everyone, guys. Type of thing. But I think one of the things with that is like, because League iterates and ships new features and new content every 2 weeks, to get those people who have that really strong first impression from even like, what now, like 8 years ago, to try it again is really, really challenging because in their mind, they don't like League. I would say the game that League was in 2012 and the game it is now is like night and day. Like, I think every character has probably been reworked. The skill gradients have been reworked. The map is totally different. The items are totally different. Like it's 90% different, right? Maybe not 90, but it's very different. And so, but it's really hard to get people over a subjective ingrained impression where they're just like, it's not for me. And the answer from a bunch of them probably is it's still not for them. But even to get them to consider that is really different versus if you tried a grocery app and you were like, yeah, I don't really need my groceries delivered. That's cool. And then somebody's like, hey, I'll give it to you for free for a week. You're like, oh, maybe I'll try that. Or say somebody's like, your friend's like, oh my God, I love it. It was so quick and easy. You're like, maybe I'll try that. Because you're asking yourself, do I have that need? Yes, no. Is the cost worth that? Yes, no. Versus trying to tell yourself you might like something all of a sudden. Like, it's like trying to get people to try new foods. Like, they're like, nope, I don't like sushi. And you're like, but sushi's amazing. Like, trust me, you just ate bad sushi. I mean, like, to be totally honest, like my husband, when I'm from originally Canada, and he used to think he doesn't really like seafood. And then we moved to California and we had seafood here. And he's like, whoa, this is a different ballgame. Like, this is not seafood that's been frozen and turned into little cubes. You know, this is like fresh seafood. He's like, this is amazing and loves seafood. But to get someone over that, like, took me being like, do it, try seafood, do it. And, it's not going to be the same. Yeah, exactly. You just ate bad seafood type of thing. So I think it's one of those things where like, it's really hard to get over that subjective impression. So deciding to release often later when you feel like the impression is going to be really good and people are going to come with you on that journey, it needs to feel complete enough for players to come with you on the journey of it improving versus shipping it too early and they're like, well, this game's not done, or this game's really buggy, as we all played, Cyberpunk, or oh, this is really shallow. I'm like, I don't want to play this. So it can be really challenging. I think that's why I, especially like talking to other tech PMs, they want to release like moment one, and I'm like, and they're like, oh, you just don't like iterating and releasing. I'm like, no, I like iterating and releasing, but it's a high risk play for me.
Yeah, wow. I had no idea, some of the metrics, for product and in tech, it's so easy, does this fulfill this need? And when the need is a little bit more subjective, where it's like, is this fun? Or do you like this food? How do you compare the metrics then? And, I'd love to know what kind of metrics did you use to define fun as a success measure?
It's really challenging. So I think one of the times I think about with that is a few things when I think about it, again, and this really, really is like really subjective to the type of game you're working on, right? Like if the game is a mastery, like you want to call it hardcore, like super challenging type of game where like the fun is in redoing it, the fun is in, failing and trying again, and you see, you're dead on the screen probably more often than you see any type of success. Fun can be harder to define because you're like, they don't get very far. So I think one of the things that I look for in the fun when it's games that, let's talk about the games that are maybe on the more forgiving side. I don't want to say casual, but more casual side. Things you're looking at there are things that are like the little loops of success. So like, if your hypothesis is, let's pick word with friends. If your hypothesis is that, placing words, getting new high scores is the, fun loop, like finding longer words is more fun, finding unique words is more fun, like words that, playing with your actual friends and you having a conversation is the fun. Like if the moments that you believe your hypothesis is, that's the moment I'm like, oh, that was awesome. Like I just got a huge 7-letter word. I got a triple letter. Like if that's the moment that you feel in your thing is the highest, I would put those type of things as my like fun metrics type of thing. I think it's like, for example, like if you're working on a first person shooter, let's say more casual first person shooter, like things like, how often do you die? Like how much are you in the fights? Like how close is the team game? Like how much are you participating in team kills? Like if the fun is the combat, right? If the fun is the team play and the combat, it's like, okay, how much am I playing with other people? How am I interacting with them? Am I getting assists and kills? So, try to play on those type of things. It's really challenging though. Like it's challenging. It's still kind of subjective in the end. Like I still have moments where I'm like, oh, it just doesn't feel good. I have to like articulate it and like stop saying that and be a good PM, but it definitely is challenging.
Yeah, for sure. And, speaking as a gamer myself, even my emotions can determine that first impression you were talking about, my emotion that day can really affect how I take that game away when I play it the first time. And really cool how you were able to take something subjective like fun and really dial it down to some form of metrics where then you can determine like, what is the loop that I want players to go on? And am I hitting the loop that I want them to go on? And I do love when you mentioned, the moment to moment, I kind of equate that to like the customer journey, like how are we satisfying them? Am I hitting a need? Am I hitting a need of fun, so to speak, every step of the way? And that's the goal really whenever we launch a product or a game, is to make sure that everybody is satisfied as much as we can. We know we can't hit 100% satisfaction, but as much as we can.
Yeah, and it's a lot of about getting them like on the things that surround the fun, right? Like if your moment to moment combat is the really fun thing, it's about a lot of the other things, like then how quickly can I get them to that? How many times does that moment to moment happen? And how many how many 7-letter words do you get? Well, not a lot, right? I don't get a lot. I'm basically 3 letters till the end. But how many times do you feel that moment of like excitement, right? And then also, it's not just about getting those metrics up. Like you can cap out and like if I got 7-letter words every time, that moment to moment fun would not be as fun anymore. But if I get that occasionally, the highs are higher. So you want to quickly get them to that moment to moment of fun, and then make sure you have good spikes in that moment to moment fun that keep it feeling, I don't want to say lively, but like it's a challenge, like it's not always there for you. You don't want to roll the dice and always get snake eyes. You want to, get some 6s and 7s and then get snake eyes.
Great. And speaking of that moment to moment fun, for those tuning in, let us know what kind of games, that have stuck with you throughout the years, that have given you that loop and that dopamine, so to speak, reward. And so if you want to dump that or put in the chat what kind of games fit that category for you, we'd love to know. It helps us know more games as well. So looking forward to that. And so for those, listening in, we are doing our last choice of the night. You get to decide where we get to end our adventure. So we'll get your input right now.
By the way, I love all the games that are coming in the chat. These are all awesome.
Same. Half of which I have played and half of which I want to play.
So I haven't played all of them. I come from like a background of like fighting game guys, so that's my community I grew up in. So I feel like a lot of those ones I'm like, I feel you. That's a moment to moment fun. Also, it's great to have salty bets and other things like that.
Great. So you all have spoken, and it seems like we're ending the night with monetization theory, which is, always exciting. And I'm sure we all have experienced it in the games we've played as well. And so, Margaret, pricing for a product manager is always such a tricky thing to nail. Especially, products you tend to pay for. So with games that are free, like such as Valorant or any other games you've worked on, how do you determine the methods of monetizing a free product? Like, what research and data did you use to inform your decision on these?
By the way, I love that no one chose or very few people chose the easy question of what do you love about LA? I was like, this makes sense. Yeah, so pricing is really tricky. One of the great things on League and at Riot is I'm not doing it alone, for one. There are monetization experts who I work with, which is amazing. And is not a luxury that everyone has. But it's because it's really hard. And I think there's a lot of things about monetization when I think about it. I think the overarching thing with it though is people should really love before they purchase, when they purchase, and after they purchase. I think a lot of people think up to purchase, how do we get them to buy this? But I don't think they think about after. And I think that's really critical, because I think if you have a player who is excited to buy something, is excited during the purchase thing, and is excited about it afterwards, they're going to continue to buy. The loop, it's like a little mini game loop. The loop will feed itself, right? And I think, you really if you don't think past the purchase, you won't make features and things that actually help create that great feeling that helps sort of feed itself. I think a great example actually is on League, there's you can do refund tokens. So if you bought something and you don't like it, you get a few refund tokens. You just be like, I don't want it you don't have to give a reason. It's literally a button. You're like, refund me. And it refunds you and it gives you back. And you're like, cool, great. And so I think features like that are really satisfying as a player and really feel good are things that you would never think about if you don't think past the purchase. I think there's a bunch of other things League does with this as well that allows you to they don't devalue old content and things like that. They actually do a really good job at that. But I think keeping those sort of before, during, after in mind is really important. I think particular to your point with free-to-play games, I think there's two things that I think are critical to a free-to-play game is free-to-play game, the game shouldn't be locked behind monetization. Don't say it's a free-to-play game and then only give them a really horrible gameplay path. Oh yeah, it's free to play. If you put 1,000 hours in, you'll get all this stuff. And it's what? That's I can't, if you can't play the whole game without spending money, you're not a free to play game. It's fine. You can be a, demo of the game or free for the first 5 levels. Just be honest about that, because it feels shitty if you're kind of lied to, right? And then I think the other thing with free to play in particular is people should have the option for some content, not all the content, but some content, to pay with their time or their money. So if you think about it, in League, you can do, this is a great example of champions, right? You can grind it out and get champions unlocked, or you can buy them. And it's one of those things where you really have to be conscious of this, because if you should have these type of options to allow people who just don't want to spend money to get more of the content. But also one thing to think about this is you're literally, if you can buy this content, you are putting a dollar value on their time, right? You don't want to be oh, every hour they play, they get $20 worth of content. That's probably gonna be a little extreme. But you also don't want to make it like, oh, you need to play 1,000 hours to get a piece of content. You need to find a balance. And I think one thing that also keep in mind with that is the balance will change over the lifetime of the player. So if I'm a brand new player, giving me some free content pretty quickly feels great because I don't have any choices in what I'm doing, right? Like, you know, you start league and all you have is a free rotation basically. And so giving me a champion, like basically right away. So like I worked on the new player experience, so sort of improving the onboarding, you know, giving sort of an update. And one of the things we did after, I think your first like full block game is we give you the option to unlock 1 of 5 champions. The champions are really new player friendly champions that help you not have a good experience, but also to give you a piece of content that you own and you have. And as you keep playing, obviously champions will unlock slower and slower, but giving those, you know, giving that there is important because I think you're really, you know, allowing players to actually, you know, sort of pay with their time. But keep in mind sort of like, what hourly rate are you charging them kind of thing, you know, like don't be too cruel, type of thing. So I think with those two things are really important for free to play, in particular when you're thinking about how to dole out content and how to create pay structures in there. I think the other thing when you're talking purely about a monetization product, and this one's like sort of true about all these, is really putting yourself in the player's shoes. We're not often the player. Like very few people are targeting, you know, LA moms who, you know, like type of thing. Very few people are targeting me. So I have to keep that in mind and I have to really think about what is the player that we are targeting and what is their purchasing power. You know, like, do they maybe have like $15 to spend a month on a game? Okay, cool. Are they, you know, are we going to be their $15 or are we going to be $3 of their dollars? And if it's only $3 of their dollars, like, are they getting anything that's worth it? Is there products available to them that, you know, a good range of sort of mix of products that allow them to buy something that's cool and satisfying? You know, make sure you have that sort of spectrum of products so you aren't just like, let's just go get all the whales and we're just going to sell these like gold bundles or something, you know. You want to have a variety for all the different type of players and keeping that medium player, like the medium player in mind when you're creating those products so that you're like, your pricing that actually allows that the majority of the players to get the amount of content you want. Yeah, monetization, there's like a lot of factors to monetization. I feel like I could just let me go for another 45 minutes now. But I think the final, I guess, piece I think about when I think about monetization is, you know, having a satisfying amount of players for a satisfying amount of content. I mean, for players who of all different play styles. So, you know, maybe I love, let's say, dressing my character up, you know, or I love collecting stuff or things like that. Like there's a lot of different motivations that people come to with a lot of their games. Like I've played a bunch of Animal Crossing, you know, I have friends who've like built crazy islands and like terraformed everything. And I'm just like, whoa, I can't do that. I'm going to go like plant flowers and collect things. And like, we all have different motivations and play styles. And I like visiting their islands, you know, but making sure there's enough content and a variety of content that meets a different amount of motivations, because A, if you don't, you'll leave a bunch of people who might spend money out. And B, you actually allow those players to sort of like use their monetization products or whatever they purchase, usually cosmetic type things, to show off their unique play. Like lean into that. Like, oh, you're a collector? Great. You know, here, buy trophy cases and buy things to show your collection, you know, and those type of things. So I think like, again, I think League does a really good job of this. I think Champions are a great example. I think Valorant did an exceptionally good job of this with their Battle Pass, actually. Like up to a certain level, you can just play through it. And it's not that crazy to get to a certain level. Or like me, who maybe doesn't have all the time in the world, will just like purchase up to the thing I want. And I'm fine with that. Like I've decided to get the thing with my money instead of my time. But other people have the other option. And I think that's really phenomenally well done. I think it's really thoughtful, and it still allows there to be some content that is purely monetized, that is purely for purchase, which gives it that exclusivity, which enhances its rarity. But it does really give does really give a great sort of option for a lot of people.
Great, that's amazing. And speaking of, the before, during, and after moments, they mentioned chess in the chat, loot boxes. I honestly, my dopamine high is actually opening those boxes and just seeing the animation.
People always rag on loot boxes. So I worked on Little Legends. I was the lead for that when it launched. I love opening boxes. Like, opening boxes is fun. The reason it's not fun is when it's shitty content. You're like, oh yeah, open this box. Oh, more things to turn into dust. Great. Or like, yep, I have everything in this box again. You just like duplicates and like things you don't want. And so I think like it can be really fun if you are pretty confident that the thing on the other side is actually really something you actually either want or will be something you could want. So a lot of times, like, again, put yourself in the player's shoes, put yourself in that in their place and say, well, would you want to open 50 boxes of things you just turned to dust? No, you wouldn't. That would be shitty. So like, maybe you can always do mechanics that like whatever they have in their inventory is pulled out of the pool from the box, so they just don't get those, right? Or I think somebody in chat mentioned like champion shards as an option for those type of things. So it's like you can give alternatives that don't necessarily reduce. People always worry, they're like, oh, well then we're going to reduce our revenue, and it's like, again, it goes back to the before, during, and after. If it feels good, I'm more likely to buy that loot box. If I start having like 10 loot boxes in a row that feel shitty, I'm going to stop buying the loot boxes, even though I love opening them. I do, I really do.
Same here. And honestly, I love that you tapped into like understanding the player's shoes and the motivations, because one thing that we always talk about in product management is the empathy, having empathy for a customer, for a user, for the player. And, I'm definitely that kind of person who's like, let's get into the skins. I want to show off. It has nothing to do with my play style. But, mentioning that motivation factor, that is one for me.
1000%. I was playing Monster Hunter with my husband, and we were playing and having a great time and really enjoying it. And I was like, cool, I think I'm good. I think I'm done. He's like, but there's so much more to do in this game. And I was like, yes, but I've dressed up the way I want now, and I'm just gonna go feed the cats, and I think I'll have fun. That's my game now. And he was like, what? And I was like, yep, I'm good now. He was like, okay, I guess. So yeah, I think that's totally a thing. I think that's actually like, if you think of all the things that we're talked about tonight, and if I talk probably about the other two topics, I think that's one of the things in general to sort of be thinking about is if you put the player, or really the people, if you think on a broader scale, the people at the heart of your decision making, you're gonna make better products, because you're either gonna make something that meets their needs better, sort of satisfies that fun experience better, or in case of like, your team and the people you're working with actually like creates a sense of trust and credibility and empathy with them, because you're putting their point of view at the heart of your decision making.
And what a great point to end on. I feel like that's something that we can take back, whether we're making our own games or we're building our products, or even just generally speaking, having empathy towards each other during these times. That's something that I'll definitely take away in my day-to-day that I'll take back. And so we've learned so much about product, games, monetization, design. Thank you, Margaret, for imparting us with your wisdom. And so while the choose your own adventure part is ending, we're going to go through the questions that you've provided in the Q&A. So please, if you have some more, 3, 4, just drop them in, we'll get to them. And so we're going to go off with our first question. This is from Lily. So are you using or thinking of using fast agile in game development?
So we do use agile. We do use agile in game development. We do false like sprints and like full scrum and things like that. I think the way the change is not in release at the end of the sprint. But it is that moment. We still use those moments to check in and pivot and decide if we're going to make changes and things like that. So we do use a lot of the mechanisms of sprint, not necessarily the release aspect of sprint. I think sprinting and agile in general has a lot of really good fundamental things if you think about it on like a functional level, like that really like empowering the team, having moments to reflect, giving the team the 2 weeks to know what they're doing and to be calm. I think, a lot of times PMs really want to get in there. And I think one of our jobs as leads is to set them up for that sprint and then kind of shut up for 2 weeks and let them do the work. And then we have our moment to change direction. Because I think if we pull the rug out from under them, they're just going to get like fed up and not want to do things. So we do use a lot of that like sort of foundational beliefs and understanding of agile stuff that allows us to do that. But we do obviously have to think like on often on very long scales of things. But because, like game development take, you guys all know, like 7 years, 10 years, whatever. 10 years is a little long, but but it can take a long time. And so I think having sprints, but then those lead into milestones that lead into, larger milestones that lead into internal alphas and releases and betas and things like that. That being said, we still do a ton of testing and research throughout that. So like as we come to an internal milestone, we'll do like beta testing or like focus groups, depending on where we are in the development cycle.
Awesome. So the next question we have is from Ray. Does a game designer have the potential to become a product manager? Sorry.
Yeah, I think really anyone has the potential to be a product manager. I think a lot of product managers I know actually come from a variety of backgrounds like QA or game design or other things. I think, again, the hard part for a lot of game designers is because they are so close to product, actually, it's hard for them to step away from solving the problem. So they often want to set the problem and solve the problem simultaneously. And as moving to the PM, you're going to have a game designer. You need to let them actually solve that problem. So yeah, totally. I think anyone can do it. I think it's really about sort of that broader thinking and stepping up to that like business thinking level.
Yeah, I feel that same way whenever I talk to my engineers and I'm like, wait, you're kind of doing my thing now. But that's awesome.
I always feel like I'm so successful when like I'm in a room and one of my engineers or something like they ask a question like, oh, what's this audience for? And someone else answers the answer I would have given. I'm like, yes, winning. Like
that's our little moment to moment there in our careers.
That's my moment to moment gameplay. Yeah.
All right. So the next one is from Robert. How do you balance monetization interests, especially with like a parent company like Tencent, with the interests of the player?
So I think particularly there you're talking about with a parent company like Tencent. So Tencent isn't really involved in like really any decisions with League of Legends. So I've never really had to have that. I've never had like a Tencent person and be like, you're not making enough revenue on this product. Or like, when I did Little Legends, which was like obviously a big monetization product, no one was telling me like, hey, you need to make sure it's making more revenue. And I think that's partially because Riot as a company is foundationally built on player first. And so we believe that that whole cycle, we believe if we put the player first, we'll create great experiences that people want to spend more money on. Like it's not a combative thing. Like the business goals and the player first aren't opposites. They're actually on the same side. If you do one well, the other will follow and vice versa. Like if you create a really, if you need to make money, you keep the game alive. Guess what? So I don't think it's necessarily like an either or type of situation. But yeah, I haven't had to have like conversations like that with any parent company.
Yeah, and I always think about like, the longevity of the customer or the user always outweighs the little wins that you might get.
Yeah, you can always ring someone for more money next week. Like it might, like I think that's the other thing. If your goals are set, like how much money can you make in the next month? Sure, I could just like shake someone down basically, but that player is not going to stick around. And again, if you create really positive monetization loops, and then you keep things that are really engaging and retentive, guess what? Their lifetime value goes up way more than if you just try to squeeze them for more money. I get there's like tons of games out there that like really do vary on this. And I do believe that there are cultural differences on tolerance for this, like what a US player will tolerate versus what, maybe a player in China will tolerate. It's definitely different. Then you still have to think about that. But it's not, they're never at the cost of the player. Like Tencent would never come to us and be like, make them make more money. They would be like, hey, like the Chinese players are okay with this type of mechanic. And it's like, okay, like if they're cool with this type of mechanic, like if they think that's fine and normal and US players don't, you're still thinking about the player first.
Yeah, definitely. All right, so the next question we have is from Henry. How does a recent grad break into his or her dream industries or companies with limited experience, but lots of passion for that product?
So I think you got to use your passion before you break in. It's one of the things I talk about, and I've hired a lot of new grads and I've hired a lot of interns type of thing. And I think one of the things that really differentiates a lot of people is the ones who take that passion and turn it into action. A lot of people have passion for games. I do. It seems like everyone here does. But the people who actually turn that into action in some form, it doesn't have to be pretty. It doesn't have to be like, oh, I made this AAA game. But it does have to be like, okay, I wanted this so much, I started doing something. So I remember I had an audio student, they wanted to do game audio. Game audio is one of the fewest jobs in the industry. There are very, very few people who will be full-time audio composers particularly, right? I think Riot is probably one of the biggest employers of audio technicians and audio composers. And I think in a company of over 4,000 people, I think we probably have 10, maybe 15. And that's crazy. Most AAA games will outsource it. Maybe they have one audio director on staff, but it's not something that we have tons and tons of that around. But what I said to him is take all your favorite games and redo the audio for it. Turn off the sound and do the sound effects for the Halo cinematics or something, right? Because he really loved Halo. Who doesn't love Halo? But redo those and put that to a portfolio that you're building. And it's definitely more challenging as PM, but as our job is to help others do their job. But I think there's still things like that where you can put together business cases for the games you want to make and things like that, where you can basically use those skills and apply it. And then I think from there, it's a lot about, are you going to break into the industry, or you're going to break into the career? And maybe you want to try to do both simultaneously, but very few, I would say, do. Maybe you break into the industry, say you have a background in engineering, maybe you break into the industry in that, or QA, or there's a lot of people who break in through QA, but you might want to break in if you're already in a job, you want to break or study something, break it in that and then move into games, or break into games and then move into your PM role. But it's definitely challenging, but I would say putting that passion to action is really important. And then I think beyond that, there are production coordinator jobs that are the entry level ones that can be really helpful. I think also people look not necessarily for games, but you can do entertainment, and that leads to a lot of games as well.
Great. So, that question, thank you for answering that. I know there's a lot of information, a lot of advice, so it's great to hear from somebody who's kind of gone through that journey. This is kind of after the fact that you have the position. What kind of advice would you give to a younger person starting off as a PM in games? And this is a question from Hamza.
Yeah, I think the thing with starting off early in games is spend a lot of your time and effort focusing on making really high functioning teams. Because I think one of the things is we don't make anything. As much as we'd love to come up with cool ideas, we don't actually code, we don't draw pictures, we don't animate anything. So putting effort into high functioning teams is really critical. I think there's a lot of people who think they're going to become a PM and are like, I'm going to spend all my time coming up with these grand strategies. And realistically, that's 1% of your job. And maybe by the time you're super senior, it gets to 10% of your job. You're a senior VP, it's 10% of your job, type of thing. So, but if you put a lot of effort into your team being really high functioning, and again, it's like putting people at the heart of it, if you put that there, they will become a really successful team, and you'll get tons of credit for that, because they're the ones who are going to produce stuff on time. They're the people who are going to do it under budget. They're the people who are going to be happy to work with you. You're going to build a reputation for delivering stuff all the time. I think the other thing is, like, there are probably a ton of senior PMs around you, and probably senior people. I would go beyond PMs. Like, getting to know them is really, like, I know it sounds silly. Everyone's like, oh, of course, go get a mentor. But like, go ask them for their deck, ask them questions about it, follow up with them. A lot of, like, don't be shy kind of thing. Like, a lot of people are like, yeah, I'm just doing my thing. And I'm like, yeah, but go ask, like, follow up with the, senior producer on like why they made that decision, why did they make those choices. But do that also beyond PMs. Like, get to know your engineers, your engineering managers, your tech leads, because again, those people work with exceptional PMs. It's great to build a relationship and rapport with those people because they will become your advocates. And also, if you have an understanding of how they do their tech, they're gonna make better decisions. If you understand how the game is built, if you understand how they make choices as an engineer or a designer, you will make better choices when you come up with your suggestions.
And speaking of, working alongside your engineers and, the other departments like game design, we have a question from Grace, who loves the appeal of PM and a creative space like video games. What percentage would you say is creative versus analytical?
Can I add a third category, which is like creative, analytical, and like interpersonal?
Definitely, go for it.
Skill, like I do. So it also obviously depends highly on the game. I've worked on pretty hyper competitive games, so I don't spend tons of my time with like the lead narrative writer, because we don't have a lot of narrative to write. But I do spend a lot of time with artists, obviously, like on maps and characters and things like that. It obviously varies on the product as well, even within the game. So I would say I spend a bunch of time with them. I would say I spend a bunch of time being analytical, looking at data, looking at talking to data scientists, honestly, trying to figure that stuff out. And then I spend a lot of my time doing interpersonal things, like literally sitting with people and like, you seem to be having a rough day. You want to go grab a coffee? You want to talk about it? Again, that comes down to having a high functioning team. If you show empathy and care for them, they'll start to build trust with you. And then as you make decisions, especially hard ones, they will trust you that you're putting the best interest at the heart of the decision. So I would say it's probably on hyper competitive games. I would say I'm probably spending numbers are hard, maybe 20% on creative things and maybe 15% on analytical things, because a lot of it also depends on the life cycle of the product, right? Like if it's new to launch, I'll probably spend more time. If it's just launched a feature, it'll spend more time on the analytical, and most of my time on interpersonal things, to be totally honest. Like getting to know people, talking to people, figuring out where they're at mentally, where they're at, like that, building those relationships with all your like cross-functional partners. Yeah.
Great. So let's dive deeper into that 15%, because this next question is, at a high level, what data do you utilize or wish you had to complement the more subjective factors, like fun post-launch?
So I think this comes down to, I like the full disclosure, by the way. I think this comes down to what type of feature, like the goals of my feature, right? Like if it's a retention-based feature, I'm going to look at things like, 2 weeks out, like what is the retention curves, those type of like curves. Or if it's an acquisition feature, obviously the acquisition drop-off points, like when we did new player onboarding, like where were the drop-off points in their funnel? Like what percentage of people made it through and why? I think the other things that I look at a lot are, early on in the process, I look a lot at like audience data and segmentation around motivations, why they play, like why they pick a certain title. Again, people aren't doing this to solve a problem. They're doing this to decide what to do with their fun time. And so having the right motivations there can be really beneficial. I also like, so a lot of like, that type of data. I think if I'm doing a monetization product, I look at things like, obviously the amount of purchases, like obviously that's a clear one, but again, things like how many people are using the things they purchase. Again, that implies they like the thing they purchased. How many people are coming back to purchase again? How many people, in loot systems are re-rolling or whatever, so trying to look at things that allow me to not, like, I have my like key performance indicators, something like things known for successful, and then I have what I call like just the metrics. And every data scientist, whatever, we're just like, Margaret, you got to cut down on the metrics. But it's because, if you're not picking a piece of data that you'll actually make a decision on, it's useless. Like one thing that I think is the best data scientists have ever asked me, they say, okay, what number does this need to be for you to make a decision, right? Like if this was 100% of our players did this, would you do something differently? If it was 0% of our players did this, would you do something differently? And if the answer to that question is no to those questions, you don't need that piece of data. You've already made a decision. You just want data to like make you feel good, which is great. I love data that makes you feel good, but but realistically, you don't need that piece of data and you shouldn't be asking for it. You need data that actively changes your decision. And so I always work to get data that is like that. So things like retention curves, things that meet your direct goal as much as possible.
Great. And I love that. That was the question from Calvin. I love his comment. The concept of fun really differs per game, aka Dark Souls versus Fall Guys. And if you ever look at those two, those are just completely different.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. They do. Like that's why I said like the game you choose is really different. I think again, a lot of it comes down to, the motivation the players come in with, like, am I here to have a fun time with my friends? I'm here to get get really good at a skill, master a skill, or Dark Souls-esque. If that's a loop they're going through, then your fun can like lead through that. And those two should be connected. The motivation they come in with should lead to your core fun. Otherwise, you're not going to meet their motivation. They're going to bounce.
So kind of going back to the career side of the questions, perhaps without that passion, what kind of advice would you give somebody trying to enter the product role in the gaming industry, but doesn't necessarily work with games or perhaps have that passion in games?
Is this from Mitch?
Which one? Yes.
Okay. I'm just reading along as the questions. I think if you've made the actual leap and you've just gotten the job kind of thing into it, I think being okay like I'm always okay saying I have no idea what I'm doing here. Like, being okay. Like I did not know anything really about engineering when I like started leading engineering teams and I was like, oh shit, so I think that's like doing that and taking the time to actually sit down with them and like, I spent hours on whiteboards with my engineers being like, I don't get it. I don't understand. But I did it to a point where I could go into a room without them and answer questions. Basic questions. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. Like I'm not an engineer, but basic questions. And that for them was really helpful because I actually was able to not have them go to that meeting. And guess what? They don't want to go to another meeting. And B, it also, again, like, they felt that I really could like understand the problems and bugs and issues that came up for them. And it honestly made them care a lot more about me and the product choices I was making, because they would put a lot more effort into understanding them as well, which was great because then they could make better decisions. So I think, being okay saying I don't know and spending the time to learn how your product really works. I think it's like people like playtest only on company playtests. I'm like, yeah, but you're going to be playing with a bunch of other coworkers. Like, it's not going to be real, Like, I feel like it's weird I get very confused when people are like, how do we get people to play the game more? I'm like, I don't understand. Like, if the game's not fun enough, then make it more fun until people want to play. But also, if people aren't wanting to play the game, like, don't work on a game you don't want to play, Like, there's lots of games out there you can go work on. We're trying to work on a game you're at least somewhat interested in, or at least you can empathize with the people who are playing it. Like, I'm probably not going to play, Words with Friends a ton, but but I did when it came out. And if I was working on it, I probably would have played a lot more, just to build that empathy muscle so you can speak, because even if you're not super skilled at all the experience and things like that, you can always go back to your personal experience. And that's a really good place to start. You're like, well, I know I'm not the player, but when I played it, I felt X, Y, Z. And you can really start at your personal experience as a foundation.
All right, so moving on to the next one regarding, your personal experience. This is from Ray. What types of metrics do you use to determine if a feature will give players a good first impression after launch?
So I think first impression, there's some things that I consider like table stakes. So understanding if I made a game right now with little, multiplayer, little bean-shaped characters, guess what? Everyone's going to have played Among Us and Fall Guys. And so they will have a baseline expectation of what that character looks like and maybe how he moves or something. So I will look at the games the audience currently plays and to build a baseline expectation. Like if I started making a first-person shooter, guess what? Most people have played, like some first-person shooter where they have multiple types of guns. Okay, guess what? They're probably going to be like, if there isn't multiple types of guns, they're probably going to be like, why is it it's going to counter their expectation. So I try to look at the previous games to build a baseline of expectation. And then I look at the motivation of why they came in, right? That like, I'm here to, get really good at a skill. And I give them loops that are around that are differentiated from my competitors. So I have the baseline table stakes that I gotta hit no matter what. And then I look at like the differentiated loops that hit the motivations and honestly, like how strongly we hit them. And so I try to leave those as like sort of my, foundational fun, I guess is the way I'm gonna put it. Sounds weird, but you know what I mean. Because those differentiators are going to be the ones that actually they go, ooh, that's really exciting. Versus the table stakes are the ones going to stop them from leaving. So I sort of group my features into, need to meet their expectations, which are the table stakes, and the ones I'm going to need to exceed their expectations are. And those are the ones that you're like, when you tell a friend about a game, the differentiators, the ones you're exceeding their expectations on, are the ones they're talking about. When they talk about your table stakes, it means they're probably negatively talking about it and you're kind of failing. So kind of like looking at all your features on like, am I going to meet expectations, exceed expectations type of levels to understand what first impression you're going to give. And is it at least meeting minimum bar, which is the table stakes? And are you having enough differentiating factors that meet their motivations where they'll walk away and be like, that was pretty cool.
Yeah, I love how, comparing like what are the table stakes similarly to like the Kano model where you're talking about like need to have, nice to haves, must haves, and want to haves or something like that, if I remember correctly. But yeah, it's kind of cool equating all of that into the different frameworks and models we use as product management in tech.
100%.
Yeah. All right, so next question is from Eric. What is your technique for differentiating between valuable community input and just folks complaining online?
Yes, the Reddit factor. So I think it's definitely challenging. But I think the way to do it is to try to not try to give magnitude to the factors, right? So, you don't just want to go look at Reddit and be like, the top comment, right? Like that's a very subgroup of your player base. So you want to take surveys and things like that are across your player base, and look at what they're saying and to really understand, okay, like that, and it might be true that comment on Reddit matches actually a very silent majority. It can, but sometimes it doesn't, right? And so trying to do some surveys to actually ask that and do some matching up is really helpful to understand the magnitude. And it doesn't need to be something crazy type of thing. Like you can, ask people pretty simple questions. You can do it in a pretty simple format, even like a survey monkey type of thing, just to get a sort of a barometer, like directionally accurate barometer of understanding that. Also, that'll help you build your own muscle to understand how accurate is your Reddit community? You know, like they might be super accurate because they're huge or something. They might not be accurate at all. And at least you can understand that. And also you can then, when some executive walks up to you and says, hey, why aren't we dealing with that Reddit comment? You can be, actually, here's why we're not dealing with it, or here's why we are, and here's the data that backs it up to, like, you know, make your decision. I think one thing you do have to keep in mind, like a little nuance there, is if your Reddit community is very influential on your quiet majority, they can actually turn the tide. So, you know, getting that early barometer of how accurate they are to that group can, you know, maybe you just jump on a couple top ones to sort of help that not turn the tide negatively. You know, we all have seen recently that certain subreddits can actually, you know, make huge impacts on day-to-day lives. I don't know how many of us made or lost money on GME, but you know, so I definitely think that's something there. I also think it's something you have to train your team to understand. Everyone reads the forums, everyone reads Reddit, everyone goes like, oh my God, I can't believe they hate this, they love this, and they get really upset and they really want to go do something. And like constantly putting that in context for them, because it's not just for you, it's for them to feel okay. It's them to feel okay and feel like, okay, yeah, we shouldn't be just jumping at this type of thing.
Yeah, you know, while we all want to show our engineers how much the work that they've done impacts people, sometimes, you know, we have to do that internal filter of like, does this actually mean much? Or, you know, and perhaps being surprised when it does influence that quiet majority, as we've seen before. And so going in, so I apologize for mixing this up earlier. Perhaps I didn't say the question correctly, so I apologize, Lily. She wanted to make a clarification that fast agile is kind of like a hackathon approach. And so this is where you kind of merge your teams into a tribe, throw the work, and then kind of repeat the process in every 2 days. Does that happen in game development?
Yeah, sorry, I didn't see it was fast agile stuff either. So it does, but in two very different ways. One, like often refer to them as like war rooms or lockdowns, where you do really quick, like you literally put everyone who needs to be on it in the room. You just kind of go at it, for lack of a better term. Usually with a really clear goal of like, hey, we need to. Often they happen in gaming when it's like we need to solve a huge problem. They're not like fun versions. I would like love to do a fun version. The fun versions are usually like we do like hackathons type of thing, but they're like for funsies. And usually we don't act on a lot of those things. Sometimes we do, but not as often. More of things like that happen at like when you do sort of that quick rapid iteration, everyone in the room type of thing, around problems, and you're like, okay, XYZ is happening. It's a huge, like I remember, you know, back in the day, for those who remember on League, like there used to be huge like login queues and things like that. And so war rooms would happen to like to deal with that, where everyone's in there and it's like the 2-day iteration. Everyone's like literally you turn off everything. You're just like trying to solve this. You're like, okay, here's a solution, test it out. Does it work? Does it solve the problem? Next, no, yes, learn, next. It's fun and terrifying because it's usually in a like, oh my God, the world's on fire kind of way. So we don't do it necessarily in like a great way to like, you know, we don't do it in a way to like generate tons of ideas necessarily, or like come up with new creative solutions necessarily. So they're usually used in like panicky situations.
And speaking of, you know, gathering that data and validating it, Calvin asked, for monetization, have you tried any kind of interesting data science experiments to validate your decisions?
Yeah, so for monetization, it's really, really challenging to do like A/B testing or what you'd sort of expect of more typical data science things, because of the fact you're dealing with people's money. You know, again, would you hate to, you know, it's one of the things, always put yourself on the worst cohort of your A/B test. Would you be okay if that was your game? And so it's like, it can particularly feel really bad if, say, you know, for some people, they get really bad loot tables. in their chest. That would be really shitty. And guess what? They'd also figure it out ridiculously fast because they all share that stuff instantly. Or like, different pricings or whatever, right? Like it can feel really bad if you do things like that experiment. But there's a lot of data we look at. We look a lot at like, like at things like how do certain people purchase things differently. I think one of the more interesting sort of data, not really experiment, but like interesting ones, like things like personalized stores and things where we're giving like different recommendations or putting them in different positions in the store, that type of things we can do A/B testing on, because it's not changing your price or changing that you can have it, it's changing how it's advertised at you or how it's served up to you, type of thing. So we can do more A/B testing and sort of experimentation with that stuff. A great example is we did some experimentation with like new player onboarding stuff, because like you only go through it once and you're on the other side and you're like playing the normal game. So we could do sort of putting people in cohorts there. We've also done some in the past with missions. Like some people had slightly different missions, but they all had the same reward, like same amount for reward. Like again, that's time for money thing idea. Like you can't make people have tons of effort for nothing and type of thing. So you have to be really, really careful, because again, you're dealing with people's either time and effort or actual dollars.
For sure. And it's like, you don't want them to have a bad experience at the end of the day, even though you're gathering data for your game to make it better.
Yeah.
So kind of, I know I've had this confusion before as well. An anonymous person asked, are there any differences between being a producer and a product manager, or what are the differences and what are the similarities?
So it varies from studio to studio, for sure. I wouldn't say there's great consistency of titling. Producers, so the way it kind of, the weird thing is like gaming is a great culmination of tech, which we all know a lot, most people work in tech as your environment, and entertainment, right? And producer title comes from the entertainment side, executive producers of TV shows and things like that. And the other side is product management, which comes from the tech background. So you have this weird culmination where certain studios, they'll err towards one or the other. So often where the differentiation comes, and this isn't true at Riot, but where often the differentiation comes is production is a lot more about like execution, about the actual like, what are we how are we shipping this? Like roadmaps and production plans and, making, like all that type of stuff, like predictability and velocity and being a scrum master, et cetera, et cetera. So sort of like the execution side of it. And the product managers are often the how and the who, the why and the who, what we're doing. Riot in particular like blends that really strongly. I think on my LinkedIn, for example, I just had producer / product manager because I literally had both titles at Riot, like just kind of interchangeably float around. They've definitely gotten better over the years, like in making that more like clear. So like, by the time I left Riot, everyone was producers, or most people were producers. So I think that's definitely like for Riot, it's not really a huge difference, but it also might change where you go. So like I put both because it's just easier than explaining it. But like, for example, now on Facebook as a product manager, but simultaneously I've been producers at other work. So yeah, it's fairly different.
And one of the things I've noticed is like, I feel like in some form or fashion as a product manager, you kind of do both. You're going to do a bit of both.
That's actually the thing is like, so that's actually the real thing is like, as a good product manager, you should understand and be able to work with producers. And as a good like producer, you should be able to work with product manager, which is why I think at Riot, like where we are more hybrid, where we are expected to know both, I think like that can be sort of much more mingled. I think also within internal titles, there's also differentiations usually behind the scenes that like maybe no one sees, where they have things that are like, where they have different titles, where they have subdivided the disciplines into things like product managers and dev managers and technical product managers, right? And like that all fits together. somebody asked quickly in the chat, and I'll just quickly roll this one in, is like, what about project managers and what about program managers? And put in every other acronym, every other thing you want. Yeah, like project managers usually, again, Riot doesn't have them necessarily that often, but project managers usually fit closer into the execution side of it. You know, you might like the one title that, like, if you have a bunch of titles in the who and the why, you'll usually have producer, product manager titles over there. And then in the like execution, you might have something called like a dev manager. You might also have producer. You might have a project manager. You might have a scheduling manager. You might have a program manager. Program manager is the one that might also be on the who and the why, because they might be doing both. But yeah, it's not consistent. If it was consistent, it'd be a lot easier because we could all like know what you're applying for kind of thing. I think usually it looks at like, I usually, job descriptions, like it might have to say product manager, it might say producer, it's like, but like vision and strategy and things like that, those are usually held to the product manager side of what you'd expect typically.
It really is just looking at the job description to figure out what kind of role you're applying for.
Yeah. It's super not consistent. Like it's not even like necessarily 100%. I mean, Riot's made it more consistent now for itself, but like most of the time I would change what I'm saying depending on who I'm talking to, because if I know you're from the industry or whatever, I might say, yeah, I'm senior producer on this. But if I talking to someone who maybe has a broader background, they might say product manager, because if I say producer, they might think I'm like, they don't understand because it's from like a TV kind of idea. It's usually where the average person talks about it. But yeah, who and why and the execution.
Yeah, I like that. I like that separation that you've done. Makes it real clear. So I hate to say that we can't get to all of the questions in the night. So I'm going to do maybe 1 or 2 questions left. This is from Forrest. What has been your most effective way to raise team morale when things get tough?
I mean, the like short answer is empathy, human empathy. Don't be a dick, I guess, like the type of thing. Shouldn't say that, but human empathy is a big thing. I think also when things get really tough, like let people into you. I think a lot of people they want to be like, being a leader means having their shit together. And like when things get tough, having a game plan and having the decisions. And yeah, that's important. But like some of the hardest stuff, like when I've canceled projects, the most real way is, yes, you need the answers to why, you need the answers to like what next and all those type of things. But you also need to be a human and understand that like you're sad too, you're impacted too. It's tough for you too, It's like literally I canceled a huge project internally on League, and I stand in front of my team, which was like 50 people, and be like, we're canceling this project. And I straight up just like bawled. I ugly cried real hard, to the point like my like counterpart was like, do you want me to like finish the slides? I was like, no, I got this. I'm holding it together. But like I straight up just like cried because I was upset, and that was just the reality of it. And a lot of them like came up and thanked me afterward. They were like, yeah, it was nice to see that it wasn't easy for you. You weren't deciding to cancel our work just because, or that like you didn't take it personally. Like part of our job is of that ownership, of total ownership of our products, is also feeling that it's getting tough and hard, and also explaining your decision making and things like that. Like when I've had to cancel things or when I've had to, change direction, explaining how I got to my decision and why I've gotten there. They might not agree with you, but at least they understand where you're coming from. And then I think on top of that is like, giving people some space to be pissed at you. Like I did all that. Some people thanked me. Some people were just pissed. And so I think like giving them that space to be pissed is also needed. But then bring it back, right? Like don't let that linger, but like giving them space and then bring it back to what's next. Like they want to feel valued. They want to feel like their work is important. They want to feel like they're working on things that matter and that they care about. So making sure that answer is sitting there for them when they're done being upset and when they're done being mad at you. Here's the next thing, dude. Your work is still important. You're still valued. Your opinion and how you think of problems still matter, and give them something to do next,
And I love that we are ending on the point of empathy and putting ourselves in other people's shoes and understanding not just our teammates, but our players, our customers, and just generally at a human level, having empathy towards each other. So thank you all for joining us tonight. And before we go, just a quick reminder, our next event is March 17th. Cracking the PM Career with Jackie Bavaro, another fireside chat. So we look forward to that. We hope you all had a great time, and let us know if you've enjoyed the session. Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys. It's really fun. Sorry I didn't get all the questions. I'm like trying to answer them now.
Yeah. Yeah, we do have a couple more minutes. We do have a hard stop at 8, but let's see if we can hit a couple more. What is the number of engineers to design ratio in the gaming industry?
I would say on things that are directly game related, I would probably say like 3 engineers to 1 designer, maybe 4 engineers to a designer, depending how much you're doing custom Unity stuff, how much your design workflows are set up. Like often the engineers start off really in the beginning, setting up your design workflows, and then your designers can ramp up and you can get a lot more.
Awesome. And I think we have one more. What advice would you like to give to a college student who's trying to become a PM at one of the video game studios?
Are you already in the role or are you on your way into the role? Because if you're on your way into the role, I think applying to those coordinator jobs, and what I look for in those coordinators are people who are going to take initiative. I am not going to be there to hold your hand and like give you tasks. I need you to like come in and be like, one of the questions I ask in my interview is like, okay, you're sitting at a desk tomorrow beside me. What are the top 3 things you want to work on? I'm not saying you're actually going to be able to work on those things, but at least you've like taken proactive thought. A lot of people think up to the job interview and getting the job. They don't think what they're going to do once they have the job. And I'm like, I can't help. I'm not here to like help you. I'm here to like coach you and make you better, but I'm also not here to like create initiative for you. So I think that's really important. I think also like, being really honest, be like, I don't know a lot about art, or I don't know a lot about engineering, but I'm excited to learn about it. I think it's really important to how we do things, that type of stuff. Try to make this answer shorter.
Okay, one more. Do you have any tips for producers who are swapping over from VFX to game art department and producing?
VFX is a very specialized slice of the puzzle. When you go to game art production, you need to think about the whole pipeline, in particular, dependencies coming in and going out. Your art will be very dependent on things. So understanding like, do you need environments or like, designs of the characters before you do the art. So understanding your dependencies. I think that as well as understanding how to get good feedback into your production cycle, how to time box it well, how to keep it succinct, make sure it's accurate and actionable. And that's a lot of setting expectations with your stakeholders out of the gate.
All right, let's see if we can get this last one. For non-game products, the hook for buying or downloading is often solving a problem with the user. Do you have any insight on brainstorming or discovering gameplay hooks when starting a game from scratch?
Yeah, so I think one of the things, I'm doing a lot of this right now. I think one of the things I think about with this is what are people looking for in their game in terms of motivations. So like if I'm like, oh, I really want an immersive experience. That's a really broad way to put it, but like what about your game can be better at that thing than anything else? So like, again, just picture yourself, if you're writing the back of the box, like imagine the box is sitting on GameStop shelf and it has stickers on it being like best graphics, awesome combat, cool characters. Like what are those things on the box that you're excited? And then I would take that and pretend you're handing that box to your best friend. And what are you going to tell them? Because that's the hook. The hook is the thing you're going to tell them. And so I think taking that motivation and putting it together with that back of the box gives you a pretty clear like audience and sort of hook.
All right, I want to check in on time. Margaret, do you have time to answer the last 2 questions? If so, let's get through them.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm trying to be quicker.
All right, one more from Hamza. How much of your PM job is outside of the office? Is like conferences, networking events, getting food with customers or your teammates?
That's kind of a lot of up to what you want it to be. You can be a great PM and build a great reputation for making like great games without ever having to do a conference or anything like that. I think it's also like, what do you like? if you're interested in talking, you want to help people and you want to like, do conferences and talks and do that. But if you're doing it because you think it'll like build your clout in the industry or build your reputation in the industry, it's not a great motivation. You probably won't be doing great talks. And realistically, you're not like, it's not going to necessarily help you. So I think if you just are like doing your job really well and making great decisions, your resume will sing with that.
All right, last one for the night. When thinking of creating a competitive multiplayer game, how do you look at game balancing?
Game balance is a really, really challenging thing. I think League definitely has like worked really hard. There's a whole game balance team, like literally like 30 plus people who are working on that directly. When thinking about balancing competitive things, I think a lot about like mastery and what skills you're looking for them to master and how deep are your mastery curves. Like, are you creating things that actually exemplify that skill? I think you also want to do things where you don't want one character to be the meta necessarily. Like you don't want it to be solved, right? Like a competitive game is about mastery. So if the game is solved, it's not very masterful. Like I would say like checkers is a fairly solvable game. Go is not a solvable game. There's a reason why they made crazy AIs to do it. Like it's a thing that has a massive amount of depth to it. So I think there's things like that with like League and other things where it's like, if it's a game that is hyper competitive, the skill cap, the goal is to create a sense of mastery. And so then you want to do balance where there is no one thing that is necessarily just better, right? There's a reason why we nerf characters all the time because, okay, we made a balance change that's like broken that type of thing, the competitive integrity aspect of it. So it's definitely really challenging because like you don't quite know by playtesting it yourself what 100 million players are going to do with it. So you need to be ready to make changes quickly, but you never want to try to do something that like skews it too far one way. You don't want like a best in slot. You don't want to have that problem where you must pick this character.
Yeah, for sure. We've all encountered those situations where whatever we do, we somehow can't win in those kind of competitive multiplayer games. So that's it for the end of the night. And we all know who the hardcore players attendees are here tonight. So thank you so much for staying us past the 8 p.m. deadline, past 8 p.m. hour. Thank you so much for joining us, and we hope to see you at our March event. Thank you, Margaret.
No worries. Thank you, everyone. I hope this was fun.